McLaren has a larger window than Mercedes, and Mercedes is basically maxed out. And Mercedes should be worried because as the season goes by, I see McLaren getting faster and faster and faster. We already saw Piastri, who almost won in Japan. So, well, and the argument I'm going to have is that Mercedes has everything baked in. They have their concept. They're the masters of this regulations, and they've made a engine-centric car, which is unified in a beautiful way around the engine. It's aero everything. And I don't see much room for improvement. McLaren was heavier at the earlier of the season. They hadn't come up with a defined aero package, and they were slower. But we have to remember they have the same power unit as Mercedes. And lately, as they've been getting better, especially in Japan, we started to see that they started having more straight line speed and better deployment because of that engine and because the body's being able to integrate better with the engine. But what we're going to argue here is that as much as McLaren will sculpt their car to the engine, they're not an engine-centric team like Mercedes. McLaren is focused on, I call it a mechanical grip-centric team. Basically what I'm trying to say is that they focus on mechanical grip, on suspension, on ride quality, and on aero flexibility. What I mean by aero flexibility is they may not be the best on any given track, but they're flexible in that they can handle any type of surface, whether it's bumpy, whether it's very flat. They do tend to do better on bumpy tracks, though, whether it has chicanes or curves and everything. So the car is built with a mechanical principle rather than an engine motor principle. It's a mechanical principle. And what's going to make this car dangerous is not only does it have a mechanical principle in which the suspension is great and the ride quality is great, they also have that powerful engine that Mercedes has, so that they're going to have a lot of straight line speed no matter what, even if they aren't integrated as well as Mercedes. Okay, so let's take a look at it. Piastri came second in Japan, and the car looked pretty fast. It lost a lot of weight. And it seems like they're beginning to learn more about the ERS, the software, energy recovery system. Okay. But now coming into Miami, they're bringing major upgrades. And we have to remember, Miami is a street track of a bumpy track. And what they've done now is they've taken their initial concept, which is to have a narrower wheelbase and a shorter car, which should give you better traction and better stability and cornering once they figured out how to wrap and stabilize it. So what they've done is they brought changes to their body now to stabilize the car and wrap it tighter, but not wrap it tighter on focusing on engine performance, wrapping it tighter to bring out more of the performance it can have over curbs and bumpy tracks and chicanes. So basically they've upgraded their car to wrap it around their suspension and their mechanical qualities of the car rather than wrapping it around the engine. But at the same time, that they've taken some modifications for the engine too. Another thing they've done, which is the principle that they do, is they don't bring little upgrades to deal with little problems. What they do is and they've been doing this. This is how they caught up to Red Bull in the other era. What they do is they wait weeks and weeks of data on how deployment works, data on how ERS works, data on how the suspension and everything react on the track. Then they bring a major upgrade based on a lot of data rather than just, like you said, knick-knack changes that you see Mercedes doing, not Mercedes, that you see Ferrari doing. Ferrari makes an upgrade every week to solve a problem last week. McLaren looks at the totality of the problems holistically and builds up data and then brings a massive upgrade. So the massive upgrade they're going to bring in Miami, once again, is building around the concept of having a narrow wheelbase and having much better mechanical grip, traction, and things in other cars, but now bringing it out, because before it wasn't fully out because the car was heavy and they had spaces in the car to accommodate for the engine. But now that they've wrapped up the car properly based on data analysis that shows the most stable way to do that, they're going to be dangerous. And you're going to see that on tracks where there are street races like Monaco and things like that, they're going to be doing a lot better than Mercedes. I know we always talk about the power of the engines, but no matter how powerful your car is, everything starts with the tires and the suspension. So I think you're going to see them do very well. Then on flat, high-speed tracks, Mercedes will do well. And this is the same thing that happened last year. Red Bull was beating McLaren on flat tracks, but McLaren was beating them on bumpy tracks and tracks with a low grip. So we're not saying they're going to beat Mercedes, but I think the second half of the year, they might outscore Mercedes, but maybe not outscore them for the whole season. What are your thoughts, Afolabi?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the McLaren's more like a mechanical grip slash suspension centric team. Their mechanical grip and suspension behavior is where their strength is. Also, their ride stability, you know. And if you look at all these things, the strength in this place is able to help them stabilize even when there's a regulation change, rather than pure aerodynamics. And if you look at mechanical grip and balance, these traits they also translate well across different track types. Basically,
Yeah.
their approach is as the season progresses, they want to do more technical. Basically, as the season progresses to maybe more technical circuits, more circuitous tracks, with bumps and elevation changes and complex corners. If you have a strong mechanical fundamental, you become more consistent and you can extract performance easily over the race distance. And I want to talk about their ERS and race execution development as well. McLaren's incremental refinement of their energy deployment has translated into qualifying laps and race mapping. And this suggests that they have a system level optimization that is different from Mercedes. Their approach is more system level and it's more data driven. And they are not approaching their design and optimization in isolated components, basically. And if you look at these marginal gains, though it may be a bit slow, they may not have hit the ground running like Mercedes. The marginal gains in deployment strategy can significantly affect your lap time and race pace over a season. And then with improvements in the better energy management, improvement in tire life, overtaking ability and defensive capabilities, these advantages will be visible in raw pace metrics as we approach the business end of the season. So McLaren basically emphasizes, how their chassis, aerodynamic and engine packaging and software interact in a unified system rather than optimizing each of them in isolation.
Beat my point, Einstein. No, go ahead. No, but that's what you're saying. Go ahead.
So basically, I think performance in modern F1 comes from the quality of your integration. A slightly less powerful component that works perfectly within a system will always outperform a theoretically stronger but poorly integrated one. I mean, Aston can tell you that already. Yeah. So this system, the system's thinking is often what separates the top cars from the development team. So I think, like you rightly mentioned, mechanical grip and stability is where their strength is, but they have started the season in a more measured, more methodical way. The ceiling is high and their development curve is steeper compared to Mercedes. But at the end of the day, you would see that they will catch up and even perform better as the season progresses, basically.
Yeah. See, Mercedes chose to choose software, and I think they're always going to have the best when it comes to software and deployment for just pure raw power. They have the same power unit as McLaren, but Mercedes' concept, their holy grail concept, what they center everything on is deployment and power. That's what they do, and being able to do the balance between the ICE and the electrical part of the racing. Now, what McLaren is doing, even though they have that same engine, they're not shirking their responsibility on looking at deployment, but they want the base of, they want their deployment, even if they have deployment, power and raw dumping of power in the back straights. That's not their focus. Their focus, once again, which has been the same anywhere Rob Marshall goes, or has been the same for McLaren, even in the ground effects era, is to win the race from the ground. What I mean by from the ground, with the tires, traction, good suspension, everything, and having a stable platform. So in other words, McLaren is willing to sacrifice some of the raw power that Mercedes has by being a ride quality centric team rather than a raw power centric team. Now, at the same time, because of their method, no matter what they do, they wait to collect lots of data before they bring upgrade. So when they're taking data, they're not just taking data on how the ERS is working with respect to power with deployment in the engines, or how the mechanical grip and traction is working. They're actually taking data to see how all of those things in unison work, keeping in mind that their key identity is ride quality. That's what their identity is going to be. And I think that the fact that they have a Mercedes power unit is to their advantage, though, because if they had to make their own engine, or they had an engine like a Ferrari engine, then they wouldn't have what I would just call the raw power that comes by virtue of having that power unit. Now we know that Mercedes will get more out of it in terms of probably straight line speed at the on a track. But what McLaren is going to do is they're going to figure out a deployment method which also takes into account ride stability, because we have to remember that ride stability also harvests energy without having to click, without having to lift and coast, like what we saw with what's his name, Piastri in the S's. He was charging his car without having to slow down, and so he was using kinetic energy to harvest rather than clipping, which means that you don't have to give up at the end. So the McLaren system might be more efficient than the Mercedes system. And I dare say that this year Mercedes may win the championship, but by next year, with this window, McLaren will be ahead of Mercedes next year. Same thing with Red Bull. They were catching up to Red Bull because they're being patient. And we're not going against Mercedes methodology, because Mercedes had to jump out of the box quickly because they're not a team that builds up gradually and has a large window in any of their concepts. They have a zero pod design. Once you have a zero pod design, there's nothing left for improvement. What are your thoughts on Falabi before we head out?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Mercedes may end up winning, although I think it's really too early to call the shots here. But their early and aggressive upgrades implementation gives them a short-term edge. But what I like McLaren is because of the fact that they are heavy on data correlation and simulation correlation before introducing their upgrades. While this may be slower initially, it often leads to more reliable and effective upgrades. Each development step is more likely to produce measurable gains, improving their efficiency under the cost cap constraints. And Mercedes looks to be in very early. McLaren is basically focusing on their grip, their ride quality and balance. And these are traditional strong areas. This is going to give them a wider operating window, making their car more predictable and adaptable, especially over race distances, as we change circuits from circuit to circuit as the season develops. So I think their approach has been measured. Slow it may be, but I think, like you rightly mentioned, by the end of the year, they would have been well and truly above or at par with Mercedes.
Yeah, I'm going to be real for you. Piastri for president. That's what I say. I'm making a very radical, I'm going to make a very radical prediction here. Piastri may very well win the drivers this year because this car is getting better. And what we saw him, and we have to remember, in China, these guys didn't finish the race. They didn't start the race, McLaren. So we didn't see them. We were just talking about Ferrari and Mercedes. So what I'm saying is that rumors of McLaren's demise have been greatly exaggerated.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, they were having.
Even when they were not doing well, I knew they had something. I knew they would pull a rabbit out of the hat. I knew they would pull a rabbit out of the hat.
They had two issues. Yep, they hadn't figured out the wiring and the software, and the car was too heavy. The car's getting lighter and lighter by the day. Yeah. All I can say is Piastri for president.
Yeah, and if it's better that it's driving all your metrics, you can't be as aggressive. You can't be as aggressive as Mercedes is. Yeah. It has to be slow and methodical.
And there are two things about McLaren. Not only are they data just driven and thousands of tests before upgrading, they're data driven and they're also holistic, which means that they're looking at the data as how the whole car is functioning rather than one part.
Yeah, not in isolation. Absolutely.
Mercedes is more isolated. They're not as isolated as, let's say, Red Bull. But Mercedes, so what McLaren does is that they want the data to show how an upgrade will affect every component of performance. You get my point? And it's patient. But what happens is every 6 weeks they bring an upgrade and it's a massive upgrade because it's patient. Rather than Ferrari brings upgrade every week. Winglets, treble sweet to make your tongue faster. Without add wing to the wing to the wing.
So, exhaust or sometimes they just change the angle of a particular wing.
And when you do that, you improve one thing and you cause another problem.
Yes, it's at the compromise of something else. It's at the compromise of something else.
You guys have been watching the craziest F1 show. Two kids from Nigeria, waxing, poetical, and technical. Stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Like, share, subscribe. Especially our fans from Nigeria, man. West Africa, you got to start signing up to our show. The guys from India are already doing it. The guys from Iran, The guys from Britain, we don't want them. Okay, I feel like he take us out.
Yeah, it's been another brilliant, very technical and interesting F1 show. We have been discussing McLaren and how their development has been very methodical and steady. And for Mustafa and myself, we'll be back with another interesting Formula One show. Bye for now.
I feel like this was a hot one, man. Hot one. And you know what we can do? We can do it our next show. We can do it. Our next show. We'll be looking